Hello, today's August 30, 2023, and I'm honored to have the always interesting Charles Love with us. Charles, tell us about yourself and your writings.
I don't know if I'm always interesting, but thanks for having me. It's always good talking to you. Charles Love, Executive Director of Seeking Educational Excellence, co host of the Cut the Bull podcast, and author of Race Crazy, Logic, and We Want Equality, amongst other things. Writings, I don't know. I write about the culture, things, usually things that irk me. Try to stay away from politics, but people pull you in. And I just think that we have some serious problems. We need to have honest conversations about them. And for those of you who are embattled in this and pulled into these political debates, they are important. I'm not telling you not to vote or does it matter, but I don't think we can legislate our way out of the problem. So we need to focus on what's happening culturally. How'd I do?
Fair enough. So just very briefly, who's your audience, and how did you get to be in this position of wanting and gaining a voice?
Well, it's interesting. You do this podcast and people do other things, and even on the large scale, the very successful, people with millions of followers. It'd be interesting to see what they say if you ask them that question, because there's who watches and who listens to you, and that's who your audience, because they're your audience, and who are you really talking to? Like, who do you want to be your audience, right? And that's the thing. What I think, I just mentioned the thing about the culture. What I think is lacking in a debate, and I'm brilliant enough to understand the problem, but I'm not smart enough to figure out how to deal with it, is that the people who really need to hear my message, and others as well, aren't the ones listening. So I always hope that whoever is listening will tell a friend or talk to somebody else. I talked about the cultural thing, and that touches all of us. But most people who would be, I guess, not politically partisan enough that they won't listen to you, because I'm on the other side, I won't listen to what you're saying. They exist, and there's lots of them out there. But they're not listening to podcasts or watching the news, and they're not doing any of that stuff. So ideally, I would want it to be people who want to talk about these topics that are, in the ether, the ones in the news, the one that people are talking about at work at the water cooler. But people that want to be educated on these things, but don't know where to get the information because everything is just coming too fast or it's too political. And because I'm more right-leaning, I'm not a Republican, but people label you as such, but I am right-leaning. I want to talk to people who disagree with me on the issues so we can hash out those things and say, well, I agree with you on this, but I don't agree with you on that. What I find is those people are less likely. I'm starting to get more, which is good, which means something is changing, but they're less likely to be willing to come on. So it's hard to have them on as a guest. You talk about how do we get started? Will and I got together. I'd interviewed him a few times. We kind of met each other through this discourse and thought he was interested and said, we should do a podcast. We need a third. We wanted to have a woman on. That's how we found Shamika. And the goal was, like, we thought naively that we were just going to do a bunch of, people who didn't really agree with us. So all these people who you would post something on Twitter and they'll tell you you're wrong. We're like, great, let's talk about it. And none of them would come on. They would say yes. And then when you DM, it's like, all right, well, what's your schedule like? They were like, oh, I don't really want to record it, right? They didn't really want to talk about it. So you end up finding people, if you look at a lot of the early shows, who are, I don't know, I don't want to label them, so I won't call them whatever. But generally, they were people who considered themselves liberal, but didn't like what was going on in the culture. And then later, when I would invite more openly liberal people on, they would argue that I only have right wingers on. I'm like, well, what about these people? No, they're not. They're not really liberals, right? So they in their own minds, you should be able to label your own self and self-identify. They consider themselves liberal. Their views would be considered mainstream liberal, but because they don't agree with you on COVID masking, illegal immigration, defunding the police, the gender issue, or race, that makes them a right winger. So they can be against the death penalty. They can be, a pro-choice on abortion. They can want big government to come in and solve problems. All of that, things that most of us would be considered traditional liberal, but they're right wingers because they disagree with you on those items. So that's kind of who we wanted the audience to be and what we're trying to do. And lastly, me getting into this, it was just because I was watching the dialogue, and one, I thought there was something missing because we're all busy. Why do this if you're going to say the same thing someone else is saying? I thought there was something missing. And I thought at the time, this was years ago though, but I thought at the time, most of the people who were out in front, radio, podcasts, or speaking and writing were people who were getting pigeonholed. That happens anyway. But based on your education, your degrees, your job, and all these things, they're gonna, like, if you're a Black conservative, say, yeah, but you're a CEO and you went to Harvard, so you just don't understand the normal Black experience. And at the time, I'm like, well, wait a minute, I'm a restaurant manager. How normal can I be? You know, people don't even realize that, but that's what I used to do for like 20 years. So I was just a restaurant manager, but I just talked to regular people every day. So I'm like, so let me address these things from a standpoint of a regular person. I call myself the academic whisperer. So all the wonderful academics will write all these books that I read, and I would translate them into normal speak. So that's kind of how I got into it. And lastly, when everything became about race, I understood that there were very few voices who were speaking against it from a moral standpoint that were Black. Everybody who was speaking out against it they were doing it because somebody came for them. Like, they were doing it to defend themselves. Like, how dare you tell me to leave campus? How dare you call me a white supremacist just because I don't agree with you? And I thought if we just waited until the culture shifted and it came for us, it'd be too late. So some people needed to speak out. So I said, why not me? I was looking around for someone else to do it. So I took on the mantle, I guess.
Okay, so one of the elephants in the room is BLM. I think they have a great name, Black Lives Matter. I mean, who's going to argue with that? But can you challenge the mainstream narratives, or I don't know if they're mainstream, but say left narratives regarding BLM, and give us some of the reasons behind your perspective? And has BLM benefited the Black community?
No, that one's easier. I'll do that one first. No, not even close. In most ways, it harmed. But the flaws in it, as you can see, I leaned the wrong way in my book on that side. I did a bad job. There we go. I talk about that, Race Crazy. I talk about BLM and the problems with BLM, and I try to do it from, of course, if you disagree with me, you're going to say it's partisan, but I do it from a very even-keeled approach. And much of my approach with anything I disagree with isn't that you're wrong, right? I will openly say, I think you're wrong, and this is why I think you're wrong. But that's not my only premise. I mean, if that's all I hung my hat on, I would be like anybody else. What I then say is, but let's assume you're right. Let's assume that the police are hunting down Black men and shooting them. Let's assume that they are racist and the system is racist. There's a few things I need to ask you. One, if that's true, would you and should you behave in the manner that a lot of the people are behaving when they interact with the police? Like, if I thought the police were basically akin to slave patrols who were out looking, itching for a reason to shoot me, and I don't want to die, I probably wouldn't spit in their face and punch them, right? So you have to ask yourself, do you really believe that? Because you seem pretty antagonistic right from the jump. Like, they put, you know why I pull you over? F you. I don't have to listen to you. That's not the way you'd act to somebody with a gun that you think is trying to kill you. First thing. Secondly, if the police are hunting Blacks down and trying to kill them, BLM, that's the whole purpose they were founded, to push back against that. If that is true, notice I'm not saying it's not true, but if it's true, I haven't been on in a while, but when I wrote the book and prior to that, I was on their site on a regular basis. This may shock you. Go today, anybody who's listening, go check it out. Maybe it's still there. But what shocked me the most was that if you went to their site, it said very little about police brutality. So think of it this way. Planned Parenthood and the NRA, I like to use those because those are very powerful, large, well-known organizations with a goal in mind that are politically opposite, right? So I'm not taking sides. But if you go, whatever you think of Planned Parenthood, when you go on their site, you know what they do. Whatever you think of the NRA, you go on their site, you know what they do. So there's gun stuff all over the NRA, gun rights, Second Amendment, blah, blah, blah. There's all kind of women's reproductive rights all over the Planned Parenthood site. BLM site doesn't say anything about policing. There's stuff about the Democrat Party and about voting rights. Nothing against voting rights. We can have that argument, but the organization founded on police brutality should not be talking about voting rights. If you are the, childhood juvenile diabetes organization, that's important organization. You don't talk about housing for veterans. It doesn't mean you don't care about veterans, but that's not what your charity is, right? So that's the second problem with it. So I don't think it's true. Even if it is true, their avenues to correct it is bad. And then, the other problem with it is I kind of in the book bleed the BLM into the 1619, because the narrative they spin is they like to talk about systemic racism. And I have my views on that. But regardless of whether I'm right or they're right, because we disagree on that, the issue is they, like the 1619, draw a straight, direct line to slavery, Jim Crow, everything. So if you and I are both doctors, we went to the same university, same number of years of profession, and we're the same, practicing the same type of medicine. But you make more money than me. Slavery, the system. That's the reason, right? They don't look at any other factors. Maybe you're better than me. They don't look at the hours you work. They don't look at grades in school. They don't look at anything else. Kendi's famous line: "Any discrepancy is due to racism, and the only way you can fix it is to discriminate against the person that has more privilege." And so those are the main reasons that BLM has a problem. There are other smaller reasons. But lastly, you mentioned it's helpful. I gave you a quick note, but the problem is it doesn't mean it's right, because the police have a job. So people talk about the Ferguson and then the George Floyd effect. Should the police pull back? Probably not, but they're humans, and if you call them names and spit in their faces and throw things at them, and then you try forget about all that. They're tough; they can take that. If you try to charge them and put them in jail for doing their job, guess what? They're not going to do their job.
Yeah, no, it's an amazing thing. What you said. I just want to bring up very briefly a couple points that came to mind. First of all, I had this ongoing email discussion with a friend of mine, and we've been bringing up kind of BLM issues, and he brings up his friend in the suburbs who feels oppressed because the police look at him differently. He's black, and he's in a white suburb, and so forth. And I try to attribute the blame for that. I obviously this guy's not at fault. He's a computer engineer or whatever. But there is kind of this tag where there's a different level of proportionality of crime in inner city black communities versus, I don't know, the inner city white communities, say, or whatever. So there's kind of this tag. I'm wondering whether you kind of feel that. I'm going to bring up a couple other points quickly because I have them top of mind. Another one is the point about you getting pulled over. I remember this Chris Rock routine where he, this about 15, 18 years ago, like things you don't do when you get pulled over by the police. He did exactly that one. I don't know if you remember that one. Mm-hmm. And then as far as the income one, I read a study about black graduates of medical school, and they kind of self-select to certain types of jobs and places.
Women
which
too
might have different incomes. I mean, if they're going to be the community director of a public health clinic in Dorchester or Harlem or whatever, Bushwick, then they're going to have a different price point than the guy who decides to set up an ENT practice in Summit, New Jersey. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so a few of those points there. So getting back to, I don't know, do you have any questions about or anything, any points of departure of what I said? Should I ask a different question?
Well, two things. One, people will dislike, and then the other, they'll say, okay, I get what you're saying. So to give the benefit to the person your friend used as an example, I will question that only because of the age, because it usually skews younger. So if he's older and that's happening, that might be a problem. Then he's got to look at other factors or whatever. Maybe it's racism. I don't know. But it's less likely that, the disproportionality of crime in the black community would be causing them to pull him over if he's an older guy. I don't know how old he is, right? Mm-hmm. But once you start to get into your 40s and stuff, that starts to fade a little bit, depending on where you are. But it's funny you mentioned that. But to my views on that, in my first book, I think I wrote about that. And it's funny because I was one of those people when I was younger, get followed in the store and all that kind of stuff. And I would be mad about it, right? And I would call it racist or whatever. I don't know if I just explicitly say it's racist, but I would definitely be mad about it. But then I'm a, deeper thinker than most people. I observed. And what I noticed, I would see, because, I'm right at the age when they started to do that in school. So when I was little, they didn't do it. It was more like high school when the stores started to put the mirrors up and stop you and following around the store. And I say, oh, they must just think we're all thieves. And I'd be clutching my pearls. How dare they? And then I look around, I see all these guys who go to school with me snatching stuff off the shelves. So what makes me different from them is I had the same feeling as them. It's racist. They're singling us out, whatever. But then I'm also honest. Then I'm like, dude, They're following me around because I look like you and you all are stealing. If they come in here from the suburbs to give a service and there's the small mom and pop and they're selling stuff, and 100%, now most of the, very small percentage of the kids are stealing, but 100% of the people who are stealing are black kids between 12 and 18. Who do you think they're going to watch? It's not racism's fault. It's not the store owner's fault. It's your fault. It's your peers' fault. You need to start turning them in and telling on them and saying, look at what this guy's doing. So if you laugh about it or you eat the chips that they steal, like I got a bag for you, then you should expect to be followed around. So that's part of it. You can't just say it's all racist because you have to ask yourself. I think what I ask is because they are in the community, black community, a lot of people like to blame immigrants. We got this Jewish, we have this Korean, we have this Muslim, we have this person come into our neighborhood and open up a store, and then they treat us like crap, right? And you have to ask yourself now you have to verify that and watch it and monitor it and assess it and see if it's true. But one of the things you have to throw in there, if you can throw all the negative stuff, you have to also offset that with what are the chances that this person has such a negative view of blacks that they're going to drive in here 5 days a week, 6 days a week to spend 11 hours in the community with a bunch of people. Wouldn't you just open a store somewhere else? Right. And you can say, well, they want to make money, but they can make money somewhere else. So if I can make 15% less, but I have less theft, less crime, and I was dealing around black people I don't like, wouldn't I just make the 15% less? So they can't hate you that much, right? So you have to think about it that way. And most people just stop at racism and they don't go any further.
Well, the other question would be, why didn't the black neighborhood people open the fruit stand? I mean,
or that.
Yeah, this is. I mean, I on a personal basis, I've been mugged 3 times, and I was pummeled once, and that was by 3 black kids. I was in college age, whatever. And I don't know if they were kids, but they were like a little younger than me. And the other time was New York City subway, 3 black guys, and then once right in front of the Museum of the Metropolitan Museum of Art by 3 Puerto Rican kids, I think. But so I've been mugged by white people. It's very small samples. My lifetime hasn't happened in decades. It was all from like the 1970s and whatnot. Different era, but I think that era is coming back. I don't know. On the other hand, I think the danger. I had a dream last night. And I'm walking. I skateboard and I actually don't skateboard. I have a scooter, and I zip through areas. I bicycle and whatnot. And in this dream, I didn't have any of those things. I opened my trunk. I didn't have my little scooter to zip through. And I was going to go through an area, and it was just happened to be dark. And I'm like, you know what? I'm not young anymore, and I don't want to be stopped. And I wasn't thinking about the color of the person because it's going to be dark outside. But I think there's always a natural fear that people have. And a lot of this stuff, I think preys on people's fears. And obviously we've seen through COVID, fear is a huge motivator. Anyway, I'm just going to leave that there. I actually, speaking, I guess, on the topic of fear and protection from fear, you recently interviewed Rhonda Ezell from Chicago Guns Matter, to play on the theme of Black Lives Matter, I guess. Can you discuss the importance of Second Amendment rights restoration for felons who've served their term, how this aligns with your views, if at all, and what do people do about crime and the perception of crime and their fear for their own selves? And the ancillary, little cherry on the cake, has Black Lives Matters helped with crime in black neighborhoods?
That's a lot. Okay, I think I wanted to say something to bridge the gap there about what you were saying. So, because you said, well, you gave your scenarios of being mugged or whatever. He said they were black guys. The third, they were Puerto Rican. But it's just one guy's story. So obviously you can't overgeneralize, which is true. But a lot of times, the reason this discourse is so toxic is because the goalpost moves all the time, right? So when they want it to be an individual example, they'll say, look at what happened to George Floyd. It is emblematic of this. Look at what happened to Michael Brown. Then somebody says, well, I'm 20 years old and I'm black and it's never had to happen. Well, that's just your story. Well, isn't that just George Floyd's story? Well, I just gave you a list of them. Look at all the names. Okay, you ran off 23 names. I can give you 143 names. That's on the other side. So when does it matter? Right before I started writing about all this, before the book, I think it might have been the weekend when George Floyd died. I was just so upset because of the way it was being overblown. I started writing all the stuff. And people didn't really attack me. They just listened to it because, it was a bunch of comments. I just kept coming. And then one thing I said, because somebody said something like that, like, well, that's just your experience. I said, okay. It's one guy's experience, and this is still going to be a small group. But let's say, so I just took my siblings, me and my siblings. So three of us, three boys. I'm the youngest. So at the time, it's a little older, obviously. By the time I said, okay, three of us, all black men. We are collectively 155 years old. We have lived in cities, rural, and suburban areas, right? We've all been really poor, middle class, and one's upper middle class now. It's not me, by the way. Everybody assumes it's not me. My brother, hand over fist. Okay. We are all, what else? I gave all these scenarios where we lived, what's happened, all this kind of stuff. None of us has ever had, been in run-ins with the law, been in jail, been in prison, all that stuff, the criminal justice system kind of deal, right? I don't know. I never asked them about violence or muggings or anything, but I've had a gun pulled on me 5 times, I think. None of them were white. None of them were cops, right? So I lay all this stuff out. I said, so if their experience matters, why doesn't my experience matter? And if you're going to say that's anecdotal, then so is George Floyd then. I mean, me and my brothers have been on this earth a lot longer than George Floyd, right? So why would his experience matter more than mine, right? And so that's the problem you get into. It's like if you try to say that's not the norm, and on both sides, I also say to the people, say blacks commit X percentage of murder. Yeah, but that's a small percentage of blacks. Not even to mention you're counting people who haven't been caught, so people who've done it more than once. Or people, you know what I'm saying? So that number is even smaller. If you have the number of killings, if there's 800 killings, there's probably 800 killings by 700 murderers, right? So it's not a large percentage of blacks, right? So most blacks, men, almost no black women are not committing crimes, right? But, what happens. So you have to defend yourself. So to the guns. So you're talking about Rhonda Ezell, who was on Chicago Guns Matter. And at the point, I think I posted a clip where she's talking about Second Amendment rights, and felons should be able to get their Second Amendment right back. And for the most part, I agree. And you had an issue where it's like, you need to assess that in certain scenarios, which I don't disagree with your point. What we're saying, but all felons aren't created equally, obviously. And you were right that everybody they don't even get the vote back. I'm from Indiana. In Indiana, you can vote. Florida, I believe. I think there's like 26 states that you can vote outright. And then there's a group of states you can vote, but you got to do all these things. But I think people should be able to vote. I mean, voting, obviously, more felons should be able to vote than should be able to own a gun. Obviously, I'm not saying if you went to prison for 20 years for murder that you should be able to get a gun. But, some people should be able to. I mean, you have to assess the situation. But as far as protection, the problem, if you think about gun ownership, Chicago is a unique place because it's one of the few places, 3 or 4 places that had the strictest gun laws, and they didn't work, but people still tout gun laws. I don't know if people may find this interesting, but you used to be able to own guns in Chicago, and then they had an outright ban for everything. I think you could still have a shotgun in your house, but no handguns. No ARs, nothing. I think it was like 1983. And from 1983 until the case was won in the early 2000s, 2001, I think it was, 2003, you could not own a gun in Chicago. But it's not just the guns. It's not because of the law, but it's proving that all there's ancillary issues that play a part. Because during that ban where you couldn't have a gun, from 95 through like 98, they had more murders in Chicago than they had any other year. So people were finding a way to be murdered without the ability to carry guns. And then when that was overturned, murders had been going down. They continued to go down even though guns were legal, right? So it's not like because people who buy guns legally tend not to murder people with them, right? Yeah. Now you can say we should make them lock them up, give them a course, or maybe hold them accountable if their gun's stolen. I don't know what you're gonna do, but you can't act like they're out there murdering people. Somebody's stealing the gun, somebody's buying the gun illegally, whatever else the case may be. And if crime is going up, then obviously people are going to need to be able to protect themselves somehow, because when seconds count, the police are minutes away.
Right.
The police they're going to come after the fact.
Yeah. You mentioned the NRA earlier. And I did like a search to see how many murders had been committed by NRA members the previous decade or something like that. I think the number was a round number of 0.
I must say, could you find any?
No, I think there's 0. So all this, we always worry about, not we. You hear so much like, the NRA, evil guns. but it's like people who belong to the NRA who declare they're gun owners, and don't shoot anybody. I was at.
They also don't want you to buy guns illegally.
Right.
They don't. It's not like they want to sell guns to somebody that they know is going to shoot somebody.
Yeah, the absurdity of the Chicago law is that they have to have people who hold guns nonetheless are criminals, but of course it's only the criminals who want those guns because they have an easy prey, easy population. But just get back to my maybe I might have embedded the point too much, but what are the net results about Black Lives Matter per se on policing and or the discourse within Black neighborhoods and the crime levels thereof? I mean, have crimes gone up, down, sideways since BLM has been around? Have they protected the lives supposedly that matter?
Of course not. But I don't think that they're the biggest. Well, they might have an influence on, but they're not the biggest reason it goes up. The biggest reason is the prosecutorial discretion of the DAs who say they're not going to charge certain crimes. So here's the funniest thing. Here's the not ha funny, of course, but the funniest things about gun laws is, of course, I'm telling you, everybody should try my method. If you give them their argument, it's so beautiful because what they argue for makes no sense. So instead of wasting your energy telling them they're wrong and arguing, just say, okay, then what? Okay, guns are bad. The Second Amendment is horrible. We shouldn't have a Second Amendment, and no one should be carrying a gun. And I'm so anti-gun. I want everybody to not carry a gun and lock them up because guns are bad. Lock up all the NRA people. I want to hold the gun manufacturers accountable, all that kind of stuff. Then let a young Black man get pulled over carrying a gun in Chicago or DC or New Orleans. Those same people are clamoring for you to let them out. They're nonviolent. Yeah, they pulled the gun, but they didn't shoot it. I'm not talking about the murderer. Let's say they just have the gun. They're 18 years old. You have to be 21 to have a handgun in Chicago, and they have a handgun. So off the bat, you don't even need to look at the serial number. You know it's not legal because they're not old enough, right? What Chicago does is confiscate the gun and let the guy go. In some cases, they arrest them, confiscate the gun, and the DA lets them out. So I simply ask, I'm not even saying you're wrong on guns. Maybe they're evil. But if they're evil and everyone who carries a gun should be locked up, why does this guy get out? And you're supporting the fact that he doesn't go to jail because they don't mean it, right? They're all over the place in their rhetoric.
Yeah.
No, of course, what causes the more crime is letting the people out more so than rhetoric.
Yeah, I think the late
it's worse that people get out.
Yeah, the late Michael Gerson, who was a speechwriter for George Bush the First, I believe, had a phrase called the soft bigotry of low expectations. Mm-hmm. Are you familiar with that one?
Yep.
Yeah, it just seems like I think the Black experience currently, not that I have the greatest telescope into that per se. I'm fairly ensconced in a nice little suburb here, but I treated people of all different shades for decades in my practice. Black, Latino, whatever, immigrants and so forth. And I had kind of a poverty demographic in part. And I worked in some of the poorest areas in Boston at various times. Anyway, it seems to me that if you have, reasonable standards for people respond to those across the board. And I think it's tough for I've read a lot of Thomas Sowell, and it's tough when the message is kind of glorified. I think he had a book, what is it, like Black Redneck, White Liberals, Black Rednecks. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you read that. I mean, most of the books are collection of essays, and this one is as well, where he's pointing out, this is years ago, he probably wrote this like 25, 30 years ago, that there's kind of a glorification amongst the white community of kind of the gangster modality for Blacks. And this is presented somewhat as an aspiration goal. And we've seen this resonate. His words, I think, have really come true over the decades since, to the point that is kind of the standard. And I didn't have that as an emulation point growing up. I grew up as a Jewish kid in the Bronx, and we were told about Albert Einstein and this and that. This is where you want to aspire. Do Black kids get that? I think there's been kind of a spin, a positive kind of spin towards the roles, but at the same time there's this counter kind of pull towards gangster culture. I don't know if you want to talk about Thomas Sowell you're influenced by him or that kind of concept, and whether you think that's real.
Well, obviously Thomas Sowell is a giant. It's shocking that people don't know as much about him. I mean, even if you don't agree with him, how many people, have written as many books on the subject and on other subjects, economics and everything else. But I think that, I don't know. I think that the culture it shifts in a way, but I don't know if I agree that it's, I mean, I hear it a lot and I understand it, because the group that's more susceptible to it means that it's something specific to their culture. I mean, I don't mean it's specific as it's something inherent that they do, that it's a Black culture thing or that Blacks do this. I think the culture is shifting in a negative way. And if you're predisposed with all of the markers that would help make it easier for you to lean into, that's what happens. So obviously Blacks were already starting with gaps in economic wealth and other gaps, right, for years. Obviously they had the gap in single parent households and all these other things. And those situations can exacerbate it. And yes, the music tends to be rappers who tend to be Black, who does this, that, the other, a lot of kind of stuff. But we've seen a culture shifting in the wrong direction. I mean, let's only look at white culture in the last 30 years, right? Their single parent households has been going up. Their young men are either gravitating toward gangster rap or the darker areas of hard rock, right? Death metal and things of that nature. But beyond that, we have gotten to a society, like I joke about Seinfeld because I was a Seinfeld fan. And so I would jokingly say that the things really started to unravel. They were going in the wrong direction. And I blame it on Seinfeld. And people say, why? I said, because of the episode when someone thought George and Jerry were gay. They're gay. You remember that episode?
There's nothing wrong with that.
They thought they were gay. And they were like, no, we're not gay. Not that there's anything wrong with it. Right? And so I remember that because when you say that, it makes me think of all these people. And it's so common now. But 15 years ago, we started to get to the thing where, people used to say, do as I say, not as I do, right? I'm going to tell you the right thing to do. We all slip up, but this is the right way. To the inverse, right? And they would be like, who am I to judge? So yes, this is right, but who are me to tell them that they're right, right? I got one parent in the household. They're Black. Who are we to say, right? So then we just started excusing bad behavior, right? And then you had the self-esteem movement. That was majority white. It's like, self-esteem. You got to have good self-esteem. You have to feel great about yourself. And that turned into the me, right? I'm first. What do I want to do? Who cares about others? So all of this stuff, and now we got, now you got TikTok and all that. But let's go back 15 years or so. Time flies fast. Everybody remembered on, what was it? American Idol? Is that the name of the show? Yeah, American Idol. When, you come in and they do the auditions and the guy William Hung, he became famous just because he was bad. I still remember the song. He was singing Ricky Martin's She Bang. She Bang, She Bang. He was terrible. And then he became, everybody loved him. He got a record deal for being bad. Jackass. A whole series of people jumping off of rooftops and just doing silly stuff. And so now you got kids that want to be YouTube influencers, right? So the cultural, now people take it in different ways, but I don't think it's particularly a Black thing. You can say the violence, but the violence is particularly a male thing, right? So I don't know. I think that there's something to say specifically about rap, but I don't think the music or the video games themselves, are the reason that happens. But I think it's a cocktail. So if you give a violent video game or rap lyrics about I'm gonna kill all my enemies and you better not mess with me and all the bravado, and you give it to a kid with with two parents at home and siblings they get along with in a positive life, they might think it's cool, but they view it as a movie. It's interesting. It's just like I'm watching it from outside. I'm shaking up the snow globe and I'm looking in it. But they don't try to necessarily, some will, but as a majority, they'll try to mimic it. But if I'm already struggling and you're telling me there's no use in the song, and then I'm watching this stuff around me and I'm seeing the guys on the corner selling drugs and you're rapping about them in such a poetic fashion, then I get drawn into it. But it's not anything inherently Black about it, right? It's just I have the right mix of the cocktail that makes that attractive.
I like that. I'm going to segue a little bit. There was a Princeton University controversy about teaching about Black people's being considered disabled. Do you remember this at all?
Yeah.
And can you just give us a little background on what that is and what does it mean?
Well, I think that I might, giving them the argument, they might have a point. I thought it was funny myself. People were up in arms, but the people who were up in arms are the same people. So I tried to. I'm like, I don't think they're right, but let's follow the logic. You're saying that Blacks are inherently different than whites. You say that the system is holding them back, and then even when they get enough Black people in power, you say surely things should change in Baltimore and Chicago, right? Everybody on the school council's Black, the mayor's Black, everybody's Black. Well, they still can't just change the system. So if nothing can ever change it, and we need to lower standards, you talk about the soft bigotry of low expectations. We need to lower standards in order. So we want more Black kids in college. They're not getting a good SAT score. So we should scrap the SAT. God forbid we teach them and train them and give them tutoring so they can get better scores because they just can't do it. Right? We throw out grades. We can't add tardiness to part of the grade because Blacks can't show up on time. Unified School District of San Diego said that. So you go through these stories over the last 3 or 4 years. After George Floyd died, the teacher that got run out of UCLA because it was finals week, and they said, well, you can't just give Black kids the final. George Floyd died in Minnesota. What's wrong with you? Right? So you keep adding that in, then if that stuff is true, I don't believe it's true, let me be clear. But if all that stuff is true, systemic racism, white supremacy is and white men are the most dangerous thing, and Black people should be afraid of that, all that stuff, then it sounds like they're disabled then. Then Princeton may be right. Because of all of this stuff, whether it's culturally, systemically, whatever the case may be, it is called a defect in Blacks that you need to protect them in this bubble wrap and treat them differently because of all these outside forces. Now, I don't believe all those other things are true, but the same people who are arguing for them are saying that Princeton's wrong to say that Blacks are disabled. Which is it?
Yeah. Can you give us a little bit of the context? What did they want to have happen? And who was it? Was it a course? Was it a lecture? And
I don't remember if it was a course or lecture, but I think, yeah, because I think the intent was obviously, if you read through it, an anti-racist attempt. It's not like they were saying, from a white supremacist, these inferior beings, look at these inferior Blacks. They were saying that we should treat it that way. We're going to fix racism. We should treat it like we would treat anybody else if they had a disability. Right? We would say it's not their fault because they can't control it, and so we need to fix the environment around them.
Yeah, I've been hoping for the same kind of accommodation so I can join the Boston Celtics. Because, they're my local team. I grew up in New York City, but I've been rooting for the Celtics for a while. And I've noticed they don't have any older, white guys at my age. They pretty much are exclusive to, 20-year-olds,
right.
People in their 20s, people who are tall, people who can jump.
I think adding some older people would make it more interesting.
Yeah, I actually had a conversation a zillion years ago with the handicap coordinator of the town I worked in. And I'm not going to get too far into it, but basically she pointed out that the Celtics should have, somebody disabled on the team, like in a wheelchair, like playing the Celtics,
Yeah, you should be 4-on-4 instead of 5-on-5. And it should be someone in a wheelchair, a woman, an old person, and then somebody who's a gifted athlete, like, whoever you have there now, right? LeBron James or whomever. And then the four of them should play 4-on-4. Yeah.
Absolutely. So you had on, speaking of basketball, so you had on Jonathan Isaac. And he was discussing his book, Why I Stand. Can you talk about his story, perspective, and
he was
the ongoing discussion about race and activism? And is he one of the Black Lives that matter to Black Lives Matter? Just curious.
Probably not. Yeah, so he's an NBA player, played for the Orlando Magic at the time when COVID hit and they were in their bubble they were playing in. George Floyd dies and the players, have a discussion. What should we do? What should we do? And they're like, we're gonna all kneel. And he was like, and the way he wrote it was so cool. He's like, he knew something about it that he just didn't feel right with it, but he just kept to himself. He was quiet. They were all discussing like in the team meeting. What are you going to do? Whatever you're going to do. And it's like, yeah. So you think we should do it? Yeah, but it only works if we all take a knee. Yeah, that's the only way it works. So we're all going to take a knee, right? And then he's like, dude, I'm not doing that. And they looked at him like, what do you mean? He's like, I'm not taking a knee. He said, but we all got to do it. Bro, you got to do what you got to do, but I got to do what I got to do. I'm not doing it. And then they just had to talk about what they were going to do without it. He said they kind of like gave him a little bit of pushback, but they didn't really. And then finally, somebody was like, one of the veterans, just like, you got to respect his decision, which was good for them. And so he's the first player. So every team, every player is kneeling. And you see this icon. I think it was the cover of the book, this picture of his whole team out there kneeling. And they standing there with his head down, praying, standing for the national anthem. And he just said the reason why they were doing it didn't make sense. Was it going to help? He asked the questions like, what was it going to do? And he just felt that it wasn't the right thing to do, and he wasn't going to do it. He got a little bit of pushback. I think it might have been a little bit easier because of the bubble. There were no people in the stands, right? So for the rest of that season, they all were playing in a bubble. They weren't playing in front of people. I wish it would have been a situation where they were traveling and he was doing it so we can see the vitriol he would have done. I mean, some people would have cheered for him, I'm sure.
I assume he got the same applaud that Colin Kaepernick got.
I'm guessing no. But I think some people would have cheered for him and some people would have booed him if he was going town to town.
Absolutely. I always found it kind of inimical. I mean, these are guys that are making more in a year than I will have made in my entire career, probably times 10 for some of them.
I think somebody just signed a $300 million contract.
Yeah, well, that's kind of for a career, but a lot of them are making now $60 million a year, and I haven't done the numbers, but I'm pretty sure that's like at least an order of magnitude or more than I will have made for my lifetime. Right. But anyway, we're gonna move on. But but at the same time, they're so hugely oppressed, and the teams, mind you, are so racist that they pretty much only pick black players.
Yeah.
I mean, if they didn't like blacks and they wanted, I mean, wouldn't we notice? I mean, wouldn't we notice that the team?
Well, that's why they're picking. Remember, Colin Kaepernick at the NFL draft, the NFL Combine, was akin to a slave auction. So that's why they're picking black, so they can put them through the $1 million slave auction. Yeah, it's still. But see, the problem is with this activism. The reason why it's so hard to push back again. Those who believe it is fine, right? Those who live in it say, my lived experience is I got stopped every day by the cop. They should be mad at the cops. I mean, whether it's true or not, if you get stopped every day, you're going to be pissed. You should be, 100%. Don't have a problem with that. The problem is you have all these intellectuals who live a wonderful life and get paid to talk about how racist the country is. They can't tell you any examples of racism they experience, but what they'll say is, yeah, but I'm speaking for all the black people who deal with it and can't speak out. Well, who are they? Because they would never even, if one of those people that they're fighting for sat next to them at a stadium or somewhere in public, they'd get up and move away, right? These people have private drivers and they fly private jets and all this kind of stuff. They have a whole different life. Yet they think they're speaking on behalf of people they don't remember because they, in their minds, if I'm trying to be as graceful as possible, I don't think this is true for most of them, but for some of them, they're thinking back to when they were young and they were poor and they were in the hood and what they might have been experienced. Don't think most of them were, but let's say that's true. But even the ones who were and can think back to the overt racism they remembered, they're thinking that's what all black people experience now in 2023. But they're thinking back to 1983, right? In a very small neighborhood, maybe in a rural South or wherever they live, which was a one-off, which wasn't most blacks, which was 30 years ago, and forgetting that now they make $30 million a year.
Yeah.
So it doesn't even apply anymore.
Yeah, I agree. So let's see. You had somebody on talking about SEL at one point.
Jason Littlefield.
In education. How has it shifted over time?
What I liked about him is that he was an SEL teacher for a while. And the premise makes sense, obviously, right? Social emotional learning, try to deal with the whole child, get them to be empathetic for others, and kind of, I mean, at some younger age, it's kind of hard to tell them to put themselves in that position. But that kind of thing, just kind of say, learn conflict resolution, learn how to, all of these things that make the better you beyond just, grades and doing math or whatever. But then it got hijacked. What did he call it? Transformative SEL. So they used it as a back door to bring in all the BLM 1619 stuff they wanted to do. So now it became, let's use SEL, social emotional learning, and how to deal with other people to focus more on differences than what we have alike. Remember, you used to say we are more alike than we are different. Now the teaching is we need to it's deconstructed. You know, if you like fine dining, you know, there was a phase where everybody talked about deconstructed stuff. So they'll deconstruct this curry dish where you have powder over here, you have this sauce, and when you break everything together, you get the taste of the whole dish. So now they're deconstructing people. So they're saying, okay, we do agree that we're better together. But in order for us to be together, first we need to take us all apart and highlight everything that makes you different. You're short, you're fat, you're gay, you're black, you're Jewish, and talk about your Jewishness and why Jewish is different from being Christian. Jewish, and talk about Jewish, and then talk about, but we're all the same. Well, you just spent 40 hours talking about how we're doing and how being different is so important. Your whiteness is so separate, sets you apart from the black guy. And how are you different from him? Look at how you and Charles look. Look at how you look different. Where did you grow up? And this is where he grew up. Talk about how where you grew up is different from him. What were the people like? And you spend a whole semester talking about differences. And then you say, no, but being together and we're all one and we're all the same. But you just spent months talking about we're different. But now you want us to, but you create this thing where you highlight differences. So they do that. And then they also do it from a race and identity thing. So from a gender thing, it's like, you know, you got to allow people to identify as different genders because that's the social emotional thing to do. You have to teach blacks the way blacks are more likely to learn because you want blacks to succeed. And you have to take yourself out of your position, Brando. You can't just think about you. You had it easier in your whiteness. But Charles is black. And it's not saying that he's inferior and he can't learn to do math. Blacks are just as capable as you to do math, Randall. Don't be a racist. However, we just need to understand that blacks learn differently because they come from the oral tradition because of slavery. So if you want them to learn math at the same level as you, they can do it, but you can't write it on a blackboard. I mean, come on. You have to talk to them, maybe put a little subtle beat and some drums in the background, and then they'll learn it. But like, that's racist. No, I got an email from the DOE. People say I'm making this up. I got an email from the DOE. Hopefully they're going to abandon it because this was before Eric Adams won, and he put a new guy in. But this was right before then, and it was the last DOE commissioner, and she was like bragging about it. We're excited that in the fall of 24 or 23, we're going to start culturally relevant math and English, which means we're going to teach math and English and infuse culture into it. Why to learn English? Why? Nothing against Chinese people, but why do I need Chinese culture in order to learn English better? That's not their native language if you're from China, right? So I don't learn English better by understanding the Chinese culture. You can teach me Chinese culture in the social studies class. That's fine. Love it. But it shouldn't be part of English. What? Now they have reparations math. Have you seen that?
No, I have not seen
that. Yeah, it's reparations math. So if you're 4 times grandfather was a slave on this plantation and he served for this many years. And then we decide, and then Jim Crow was this amount of years. And we decide for every year in Jim Crow, you get this much money. For every year in slavery, you get this much money. And you are his 5th ancestor. How much money should you get paid?
Wow. Yeah. Now, I do know that there's a certain amount of reparations math, which is that like in California, they voted, you know, a kind of a blueprint for reparations. I do know the math that if it went through, that California would go bankrupt. But
they give them more money than you have.
But of course, they're going bankrupt.
Especially when we, like Will says, when we all move there, because the moment they pass that, Will and I agree we're going to move to California.
Actually, that's an interesting point you made. You know, the mass, you know, the United States is still a net in migration place. People come from other places to here. We're not leaving. A lot of countries, you know, people leave because I think the technical term is they suck. Anyway, so you know, things may not be always great here, but we're still a net in migration place, and people come massively from Africa, and you know, it seems inimical that if they're coming from Africa, that you know, racism is so horrible here that they still want to leave Nigeria, Ghana, whatever. To wit, I actually, just a little bit of a segue back to some of our earlier topics, but I saw this, I don't know if you saw this video gone viral, and it's at a BLM-ish kind of protest of some type, and a white woman with a mask, black mask on.
Yelling at the black woman?
Yeah, and the black woman, she's African, and I by accent, I think she's Nigerian, but I could be wrong. And she's yelling back, she's like, "You white people, you only care about black lives when, you know, a white person kill a black person. In our neighborhoods, black people kill black people all the time. Nobody's making protests about it," and so forth. I don't know, what's up with that? What do you think about that? What is her message? Can you dissect that out a little bit?
The message of the African woman?
Yes.
The message of the African woman, like you said, in technical terms, they suck. The technical term is white liberals are crazy and they're annoying, and she got fed up with it. That's the technical term. I mean, the ally thing is the problem. I mean, we can argue about what systemic racism does or doesn't do, and what should be happening. How do we fix things? But the white ally is all NPR tones and soft light. Those are the people who talk slower. Remember, did you see the study where they talk slower when they talk to black people? I mean, these are the race. That's why my book subtitle is The Progressive Racism Movement. They are John Calhoun. They are literally saying we're different. They want to help. The difference is he was like, they're saying we want to help blacks. But in order to help, we got to acknowledge that they're not at the same level that we are. We got to do some things to help them. So just don't lock them up when they break the law, because they're savages and they're going to break the law. Just give them the A on the test, because God forbid they can't make an A on their own. This kind of thing is blatantly racist. So I think the woman was speaking of that more about from a frustration of things that happen in the neighborhood. Just like, you don't know what you're talking about, and stop speaking for us. But to the African thing that's funny to me is from reparations. Obviously, the people who are proponents for reparations do not want Africans and other immigrants who aren't descendants of slaves to get reparations. Obviously, they openly say that. But what makes me laugh about it is that means that this stereotypical, we're generalizing here, but this black community, who is probably rightfully in some cases, very reluctant to trust the government. They did the same thing on COVID. They like to bring up Tuskegee and experiment and all that kind of stuff. But the only way you can get your reparations is to verify no white person or no African who doesn't deserve it gets it, is a lot of government intrusion. There's going to be DNA, there's going to be all kind of stuff. So now these people who don't trust the government are going to have to rely on the government in order to verify who gets the reparations and who doesn't. So that's going to be interesting to see.
Yeah, I'm just curious. Speaking of Nigerian women and kind of this reparations issue, whether it's slave descendant or whatnot, is there tension between, say, the slave-generated black community versus the black immigrants from Haiti, Nigeria, Cameroon, Ghana, whatever, kind of this African in-migration, and mind you, my understanding is Nigerians do better on average economically than American whites currently. Is there kind of a tension there? Do they, I mean, it seems to me, if Nigerians in fact do economically better than the average of whites, how much race is a component, and how much say culture and drive? Well, the tiger mom is typically Asian, but I can envision a fair amount of Nigerian tiger moms. I did a fair amount of immigration exam work for decades in my own practice, and the Nigerians, people don't like to stereotype, but stereotypes are there for a reason, because people act in certain ways according to groups. The Nigerians who came in were very driven. They were economically aware. They wanted to price haggle. They were demanding. And as a side note, there are certain kids I notice every year who get into every single school they apply to, Stanford, Harvard, MIT, and whatnot. And invariably, they are black kids from Long Island, Nigerian parentage. And it seems like they, in a sense, are benefiting from some of the affirmative action stuff, which was not designed for them. But is there a tension point? Does anyone talk about this? Is it brought up?
Well, it's funny you say that, because I always laugh, because it's talked about all the time. And they describe it as you do. They say there's a tension point between the two. But it's funny, because let's be real. Nigerians are fine. Jamaicans are fine. They don't have any tension. If there's a tension, there's a one-way tension. Right? So there's tension, but there's tensions one direction. It's not like the Nigerians or the or other black immigrants have an issue with black Americans. The black Americans have an issue with them, who are descendants of slaves, have an issue with them. One, like you say, taking advantage of the opportunities of affirmative action that are there because they're there, though they're not meant for them, and they weren't, but that's the way society changed. It allows it. We don't break down the ethnicity of black into smaller pieces, so why wouldn't you take advantage of it if you could? So they don't like that. Like that woman said to the white woman, you said, they don't like it when they say stuff like that. It's like, yeah, that's what you think, but you're different. You're speaking about it from an immigrant experience. You're not speaking about it from our experience. So it's different. you know, and part of that drive might be, you know, they're not wrong about all of it. I mean, they're how far they go, maybe. But, you know, part of the immigration thing of all groups, you know, because a lot of things, a lot of people on the right, you mentioned it, you know, Will, a lot of people. So to be fair to the people, they'll say, yeah, these immigrant groups tend to do better than blacks. They even do better than whites. However, and that's true, but I get the point. It's not like a white racist who hates black people going to say, but I like that black person because I don't think that they are descendants of slaves. But people, you just said earlier, you made a great point that people immigrate here, but people don't move around. People don't leave here. Not only do we not leave, we tend to be less, most people tend to be less likely to move away. They stay in the area. They may leave New York and go to New Jersey, but they don't leave New York and go to Idaho, right? And I say that to say, and that's just within the same country. You don't need a passport. You don't need a different language. So it's a lot to ask yourself to take a chance to come to America. And because of that, immigrants self-select. So you tend to get the people who are more driven because the less driven people don't leave, right? So you're getting the people willing to give up where they are and leave their parents, leave their family behind and come here.
I agree.
Right. So that's part of it, right? So the baseline is already gone. They coming here knowing, all right, I'm standing here ready to go. As soon as we hit the shore, I got to work, right? Where somebody bored is like, you know. And then I used to say, you know, we say that poor whites and blacks are lazy. Not saying that none of them are, but really it's just first world problems. You grew up in the first world, you're used to certain things. So we're poor, right? But a poor black American, poor white American, and a poor immigrant from India, let's say, that's not even say black, comes here. You got people who are, you know, you got the viral videos of kids going for 8 hours a day, picking through trash heaps, trying to find computer chips so they can sell and make money, right? So you come here and they're like, what? I got to rent a room with a couple other families and they share a bathroom. All right, whatever I got to do, I do that. How long I can do that? I can do that for 2 years and then boom, I do it. You tell an American to do that. What? I'm not doing it. I'm not even living in a unit with other people. I need to have my own bathroom. So it's just a different mindset, right? It's not their fault. It's the
hunger.
It's the consequences. You know, the unintended consequences of being born in an area where things are better. Then you're used to that. You're not used to, if you're coming from here and other people are coming from here, the people coming from here aren't used to that gap, right? So
and I have a friend who does a lot of contract work for me on a property I have, and he's from China, and he hires across the board, you know, and what he's noticed over time, he has a workforce of dozens of guys who do handiwork, and over time he has molded his workforce, or they've self-molded it to just Chinese immigrants. And he says, I wanted to hire everybody, and but he says the Americans I hire, they show up late, and these are mostly white guys, and they don't, you know, finish the work. They're not completion. I said, well, you know, the thing is, you've selected a bunch. The Americans don't see this as valuable work. They've been trained to go to college, and they've been trained to, you know, get you know, white collar jobs and so forth. If you have a guy there, this is a guy who's kind of like dropped out of the system and so forth. You have selection bias. So, and the Chinese guys are what you've talked about, are strivers who've come over here because they want something different, and they are willing to kind of put their nose to the grindstone, even though they might have degrees in accounting or something like that from, you know, Shanghai University, that they want to get here. They want to make some scratches, how they can do it, you know, illegally or whatever, and they can make the money and get ahead. You know, my grandparent generation were immigrants, and those guys were tough. You know, you know, I would stack them up against my kids' generation. You know, at a same age fist fight any day. You know, if we get, you know, my 18-year-old grandparents against my 18-year-old, you know, level of kids and nephews and whatnot, I mean, it'd be tough. And you know, they were tougher guys because they had to deal with, you know, genuine oppressive regimes. They had to, you know, sit on boats with, you know, tuberculosis patients and, you know, individuals. They had to go through a lot, you know, little tiny apartments and whatnot, and they worked for the stuff they had. They valued it more. Anyway, we're going to be rounding out the hour. I want to get to your books and close things out and give people a chance to buy your stuff. We Want Equality is an earlier book of yours that delves into the decline of traditional values, leading to feelings of entitlement and nihilism. Right. Can you provide examples of how this decline is manifested in society, and what led you to write the book? What's been the reception, and why should people buy it?
Yeah, so I wrote that book. I think they find it really interesting because I wrote it. It was very prescient. I wrote it in 2017. I think it came out in 18. And I saw basically I was writing about what was going to happen with the culture that didn't happen yet. I didn't know it. I saw it was happening, but I thought it would be 10 years away and not 4. But I was saying we went from whatever discrepancies or disagreements or systemic problems we may have. We went from people doing the Civil Rights Act and the movement saying, what was the sandwich board saying? I am a man, saying they're fighting for treat me the same as that guy, right? That's what they were saying. Treat me the same. To now we're asking for preference. They were like, no, we need to level the playing field by treating blacks differently, right? So I saw that this movement was coming, and it was everything. It was women, 77 cents on the dollar. We don't make the same amount of money. Not enough female CEOs, but some females don't want to be CEOs because they don't want to put in the hours. Shut up, you misogynist, right? It's like, but I'm just saying, well, there's women doctors. Yeah, but they self-select into different kind of disciplines so they don't have to work nights. Shut up, right? It became that. Like, what about women? So in that book, I write about gender inequality, racial inequality, religious inequality, all these kind of things. And I talk about how these people act like it's from a premise of we just want everybody treated the same. But that's when we started to seep into equal outcomes. And that's detrimental because we can ever manufacture equal outcomes. Some people say, even amongst white men, you can't have equal outcomes. Some people want to be farmers and some people want to smoke weed, work a job where they can smoke weed. I had people, I mentioned earlier in the show that I ran restaurants for 20 years. I had brilliant people with MBAs and they didn't go work in the corporate world because it was too restricting for them. They didn't want to do that. They wanted to pick their hours. They wanted to smoke weed. So I'm going to work in a restaurant. So they self-selected. So now in today's society, we'd have to take that guy and say, well, he has an inherent right to be a white collar middle manager at a hedge fund. He has a right to do that. No one has a right. Like lastly, the affirmative action that got overturned. What I felt that was lacking in the conversation, even from the people who were pushing back against it, it's like, why don't you mention it? No one ever mentioned it. We act like without affirmative action, we need blacks in college, and it's unfair. We need to get more blacks in college. We act like the argument is getting blacks in college. The left wins on the argument all the time because the right are bad at arguing, and they use the left language. You're never going to beat me at my language if I'm making up the words, right? They do it.
I agree. That's begging the questions. We take that all the time. It's always a loss.
Right. This is the best example, right? Because they're saying we need more blacks in college. You're not arguing for blacks in college. You're arguing for blacks in elite colleges, right? Harvard, Yale. That's what you're arguing for. That equal blacks and whites in every other college, regular state schools all over. You want more blacks in elite colleges. The problem is they're elite for a reason and they're private. So they get to admit whoever they damn well please. Now, should they not take federal funds? We can talk about that. But don't act like you have an inherent right to go to Harvard. You don't.
Yeah, no, Harvard's not going to stay Harvard for long either. All these colleges, from the 1920s, the median grade was a C grade. C as in Charlie, and no pun intended. Yeah, and now the median grade is A minus.
It's hard to get in. That's the funny thing. It's hard to. People need to understand that, right? Those who didn't go to elite schools like you, it's hard to get in. But then they give you all
easy to say. Yeah, it's easy.
So that's
to say.
why we think they're all equally.
Yeah,
same education.
I went to college in the 70s, and I think it was probably the last of the golden age of meritocracy in a sense, because we were still like Sputnik driven. We wanted to have high levels of STEM and whatnot. And frankly, I was blithely apolitical. I liked. We didn't call it STEM then. I liked, science and math because it was away from all the BS of people arguing. I just, I took my share of history courses in English and whatnot. And it's like, it's nice. You're arguing about stuff, but there's no answer. And right. Math and science have answers. And you can work hard enough, you can find an answer to something. It's kind of funny that it's become the focus of a lot of the critical race theory as well. So there are no longer any answers. Anyway, but you have some answers. So I want to bring up another of your answers here. This is your newer book. I don't know if it's, let's see if I get it up on the screen so people can buy it. And you can talk a little bit about it. We mentioned it earlier. Can you give us, some specific examples that led you to coin this term and how you think it captures the current sense of and state of our society and discourse.
Well, it's called Race Crazy, BLM 1619 and the Progressive Racism Movement. And what I talk about in the book, there's 3 sections, BLM, the 1619, and it's the overall racism of, like you call it, the low expectations. So we talked about BLM briefly. It's just saying that they don't really mean what they're saying. They're arguing for something that's not real, and it's going to be detrimental to the entire country. And then I get into education because I see how the 1619 is moving to everything. Every problem in society can be drawn to slavery, and because of that, they're trying to fix something that's not really a problem. So what I say in the book is that there are problems, and some we can fix, some are just human nature you can't fix. But for those you can fix, you need to be able to assess what the problem is. And if you see the problem as this big, the way you address it is different than if you see it this big. So our problem is probably like this, and they're going in like it's this massive problem. So they're going in as tear it all down. That's the only way to fix it. And that's bad for everyone. Because what I joke about is, who was it? Was it Nicole Hannah-Jones? Somebody said that anti-Black racism is in the DNA of America. Wait, you're a doctor. Can you change your DNA? Because if you can't change your DNA,
I think if I inject mRNA repetitively.
Oh, let's not get into that. So if the DNA of the country is anti-Black racism, and this building represents the country, and we tear it all down, and then we rebuild the building, well, we still have racism in it? Because it's in the same DNA, right? So you're building it on the same foundation, and that foundation's filled with anti-Black racism, so you still have racism. So trying to correct racism is a fool's errand. And I talk about things you can do to move the needle without going overboard and trying to fix people. Because if you try to reprogram people, they tend to not like that and they push back. I think they're creating more racists, to be honest.
Absolutely. Now, it's not as if it didn't exist before. I mean, back in the idyllic, pre-slave trade era, the cross-Atlantic slave trade era, it's not as if there wasn't slavery in Africa.
You had local slavery.
Yeah, every tribe in the Native Americans here and in Africa, they all had spears and knives and sharp weapons for a reason, because before there was racism, there was tribalism. People, and even today, the if not the largest genocide of recent memory was the Hutu Tutsi in Rwanda and thereabouts, and my last reckoning is they were all Black. It's like do they hate Blacks? No, they just hate each other. It's like
they'll find another reason to other you. They always will.
And the various tribes and so forth. In Nigeria and whatnot. Nigeria's a country, we call them Nigerians, but frankly, they don't see themselves Nigerians. There's Ido and Bantu. I don't know. I'm not up on all the tribes, but these are amalgams that got written up by the colonial era, as countries, and in their own borders, there's loads and loads of wars. I mean, Liberia, was on fire for decades. I don't know if it still is, whatnot, but it's like, people have this tendency to want things, and they want things other people have, and historically, before capitalism came along, the only way to get advantage, to get more stuff, was to rape and pillage, was to get it from somebody else, to pillage their stuff and then rape their women and make new ones of you and expand your base. And that's been the footprint modality. We figured out with free market that we can benefit, by having more than a zero-sum game, by having a positive game, that we can benefit from trade, and we can get things from other people that we need. We can give them things that they need. We can all benefit. We don't have to rape and pillage and kill them to do it. But the Aztecs, I mean, we have so much romanticization of these other empires, that might have been uniracial in a sense, but they hated each other. The Aztecs got to be, a big deal because they killed and mutilated and sacrificed, thousands of their competitor tribes. This is kind of the way of the world. So anyway, on that pleasant note, yes. I'm going to give you some final words before I put in my final words.
Oh, my final before your final? The final would be, I don't know, buy all the books, listen to Cut the Bull podcast, and you know, what else can I say? Push back against the narrative. If you know it's not true, push back against it. Doing a summit on all this wokeness in Phoenix in October. You should check that out. I'll give you the site so you can put it up. Just go to Seeking Educational Excellence. You can learn more about it. Got some interesting people. Shelby Still will be there. Misha Mena, the woman in Georgia, the state rep who left the Democrat Party, and some others. Just talking about in real forms how this stuff affects you, not just theory and writing about it, like how it actually affects you when you imply that all whites are racist or that all cops are hunting you, or the only way to solve the climate issue is to not use nuclear, not use fossil fuels, and to just go back to the Stone Age. That there's a conversation that should be had in these topics, and they're using extreme rhetoric to stop it from happening. So check that out. SEE is the organization, Seeking Educational Excellence, and that's my last word.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Charles. I'm going to close, as always, with promo for my book. If you want to help support my podcast and you want to throw money at me, which is always a valiant idea, you can buy my book, Overturning Zika. It comes with a picture of me on the cover right here. This is maybe early in the morning. Actually, I don't drink coffee, so I can't. I probably look that way all day. Anyway, this is Overturning Zika, the pandemic that never was. People may have forgotten it already, but it was a big deal in 2015-16. With travel advisories, a pandemic in Brazil, and then it's disappeared, but not in the minds of the researchers and the WHO and whatnot, CDC and Dr. Fauci, who still throw billions of our dollars on this, their pursuit of a vaccine, despite all odds, despite the fact that Zika is a real thing and it's a real dengue virus, and microcephaly is a real but very, 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 very rare problem. It just so happens that one didn't cause the other, but science. Anyway.
Well, that made me think. I forgot we buried the lead that you are our guest on the next episode of Cut the Bull.
Perfect. Perfect. Well, I appreciate
so we'll talk about all that on Friday.
Yeah, no, it's. I don't want to give it away. People will think it's live, but it was a great session. It will be a great session, and it will have some interesting. Anyway, thank you so much, Charles, for being with us, and I extend an infinite invitation for you to come back. It's always a pleasure.